And welcome everybody. We'll get started in a few minutes. We'll have some announcements. I see a call-in user, so great. We'll go over how to ask questions and raise hands and all of that before we take a deep dive. Do want to welcome you all to the March Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council meeting. My name is James, and I will be the host today. And we'll spend about the first half hour with Supervisor Preston's office and Jen Snyder talking about budgets and the budget process, which I know is at the top of everybody's list of fun things to handle. And then we'll have Supervisor Connie Chan's office present a little more background as to why they're investigating the Ferris wheel. I recognize that the Ferris wheel has been talked about more than most of us care or think it may need, but at the same time, it's really spurred a lot of great conversations as to how it's set up, why it's there, as well as maybe some things that need to be dug in longer. And then at the end of the meeting, from about 8 to 9, we'll go through some items, the rest of the items where we talked about possible permanent JFK. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll open up to ideas. We'd love to hear people's ideas on suggestions on how something may work or what needs to be brought up. We'll have a presentation, so feel free. Well, at the end of each little section, we'll open it up for questions and comments. So if something's not covered in the presentation on what might be a reasonable reason to close JFK or turn Page Street into a permanent slow street. Again, these are ideas. We're open to it. We want to discuss. We want to hear everybody's ideas and try to come up with solutions. We'll also talk a little bit about the panhandle, or as I like to refer to it, the redheaded stepchild of Rec and Park. But that'll be at the end. So we'll get started in about 5 more minutes. I'll do some announcements shortly. Again, welcome to the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council March General Meeting. Hi, Matthew. We thank you for the question and requesting to record. We record all Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council meetings. So we will, I believe we put it up on our website soon after the meeting. And feel free and utilize our video. I think, Bruce, do you have any comments on other people recording the meeting?
I don't think they can. I don't think they have the permission if they're not a host.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. Matthew, so again, we'll put it up on our website, but you don't have an ability to record, I guess, unless you have your camera pointing. I don't know. So do want to welcome everybody to the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council. Olga, I do see your question. I'm not sure how to approach your question regarding moving violation. I'm gonna go over some quick rules of the meeting. Then I'll read out your question. Maybe somebody will have an answer or be able to help you direct. And then I'll hand it over to Jen Snyder from Dean Preston's office. So welcome, thank you for joining us. And about 7:30, or when Jen is finished, we will then hand the meeting over to Supervisor Connie Chan's office, who will talk again a little bit about why Peskin and Chan are investigating a little more, asking more questions, about the Ferris wheel. It's not about the Ferris wheel, but it's about the Ferris wheel, right? So there's always something. So a couple of quick rules that we're going to go through. Regarding the chat, you're welcome to send messages or ask questions in the chat box. We are going to reserve the right to kick you out of the chat box if we deem that you are being abusive or trolling towards any members, hosts, or guests of the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council, we'll try to give you a warning. Basically, we'll give you one warning and then boot you out. So, you know, we're not, we wish we were all in person. We miss those meetings, and maybe come summertime, we can have those meetings again, because I think that's a huge aspect of the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council, is having those in-person meetings. If you are on the phone, do want to mention that you may be incurring charges depending on your phone company. So we want you to be aware of that. And we've tried to figure out ways where we might be able to come up with a toll-free option, but we don't. So just be aware of that. And so Olga mentions you need to talk to somebody about a moving violation page at Clayton in early COVID, about half a block from their apartment, in the car, and did not know this was a moving violation. So not sure if we are going to be the best option. We can reach out to the captain's office. I don't know if someone in the meeting may have a better idea. I'm continuing to read. If page becomes permanent, perhaps residential free status could be transferred to another few blocks. I'm assuming that's maybe parking. We'll talk about permanent page street at the very end, and we'll open it up. So again, welcome everybody to the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council. My name is James. I'll be your host this evening. Very good to see many of your names and faces. And Bruce and Tess, did I forget anything? I know we went over some things I was going to announce at the beginning of the meeting. Did I forget anything? No. Okay. So want to welcome Jen Snyder from Supervisor Dean Preston's office. She's going to talk for about 20-30 minutes about the budget process. So Jen, welcome.
Hey, everybody.
Sorry, I just remembered the thing I forgot.
No problem.
So if you do have questions, we ask that you use the raise your hand option. If you go to, I believe it's under, of course, I'm used to Teams, and we're using.
Yeah, it's under reactions.
Under reactions, okay. So there's the smiley face. If you click on the smiley face, reactions, you can raise your hand. It's the little tab at the very bottom. If you're on the phone, we'll ask that you just unmute yourself and say you have a question, and we'll get to you as quickly as possible. Okay, with that, welcome Jen Snyder.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Jen. I work in Dean's office. If you don't know me, hello. I'll put my info in the chat, and you can reach out to me about anything. You can reach out to me about Page and Slow Streets, or whatever. My business is your business is my business. So we're going to talk about the budget today, which doesn't have to be boring. The power of the purse is fascinating. And yeah, if you feel like the San Francisco budget situation is really confusing, you are definitely not alone. The other day we were doing, like, at the beginning of budget season, there's like a little training for aides. It's the second time I've done it because we're pretty new in office. And the newest aide for a supervisor was like, we go through the whole thing, like how it works start to finish. And at the end, she was just like, wait, what? So how do I like get money for things we need in the district? And I was just laughing because I was like, they're so confusing. Like, it makes no sense the way we do this budget. Someday we should not do a budget like this. Someday we should have a budget where it's not in the control of the mayor for 11 months and in the control of the board for 1, and have a much more participatory budget. That's how the other cities do that. It's not out of reach. It's very, very mayor controlled budget, which is good or bad, depending on your opinion of the mayor. So yeah, and it's a weird year. We are, I don't know if we're in the dark or the light. I don't even know anymore. Like, we had projected this huge deficit of $115 million was going to be this huge disaster. And then last month we found out there's actually a surplus, right? Like $125 million, thanks to such things as Prop I, the real estate transfer tax, which is now like raking in the dough. And like Dropbox sold the other day, I guess, for $1.8 billion. I didn't even know there was such a building as the Dropbox building. And I just think it's a really great thing. You can cite that anytime people tell you you can't tax the super wealthy or they're going to like leave San Francisco or stop investing. You can be like, no, we're going to tax them. It's going to be good. Plus, we found out FEMA's reimbursing all of our unhoused folks in the hotels at a 100%, and they are really expanding the eligibility there. That is a reason why every single unhoused person should be in a hotel right now. Take it up with the mayor. I do. And we're getting this $1.9 billion from the feds, right? Which has a bunch of good stuff in it, including like $40 billion for California and all kinds of cool stuff. I'll put a link to IFPTE had a pretty good rundown of where that money is going to go for California. But yeah, here locally, who knows what's going to happen, but we're going to lobby and fight, you, me, everybody we know, for good things to happen in the city and for the things that we want to get funded. I have a presentation, but I want to begin my presentation by saying that the presentation was actually made by Anya Worley, who's here, and she is in our fellowship program in the office, and she's a budget superstar, like way better at this than me by leagues. She is a genius, and she's going to be giving this presentation with me because she did the work, and yeah, she's really good at this, and we're lucky. I'm gonna learn from Anya tonight too. So yeah, we're gonna talk to you. We'll walk you through the sort of the process, and then what we can do to fight for the things that we want and the hate and for D5. So yeah, I guess I can share my screen. I have the power. All right. Is this working?
Yes, it is perfectly.
Cool. And Anya, come up here, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Anya. As she said, I'm one of the fellows in the office, and I mainly work on the budget presentation. And this is my first time at the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council, so I'm really happy to be here and to virtually meet all of you.
Yay. Cool. This is your part, right, Anya?
Yeah, it is. I can kick it off here. So we're going to talk tonight about exactly that question that one of the new aides asked in the budget meeting. How do we get money for the things that we want as a supervisor? There's a few different ways that we can do that, but we're going to talk today about add backs, as that's the part that is the most community-based and the most participatory part of our budget. So we're going to tell you how they work and how to advocate for your ask. So you go to the next slide. So to start off with a view of the budget process, it really is mayor controlled, no way around that. So in December, the mayor tells us what she wants from the city departments. And this year she said 7.5% in cuts, which is quite big and quite hefty, but not that bad compared to last year, which is really nice. And in February, the departments submit their budgets. So that just happened. And in March through May, so going on right now, the Budget and Appropriations Committee, which is chaired by Matt Haney, he holds hearings based on key departments. Today was DPH, I think, and yesterday was DPH and another department as well. And there's a few more coming up. And we'll talk about that at the end of the meeting, the different ones that you might be interested in. And the mayor will propose her budget on June 1st. There'll be a public comment day on June 25th, which is where you can tell the mayor what you think of her proposed budget, what you think of what the supervisors have put forward. And that's where we like to see a strong showing for a lot of the support that we would have already have gotten for the things that we would have already have put into the budget. And then I'll talk about add back night, which is the final night of deliberations on funding. It's where everything goes down and the supervisors and the budget chair finally decides this is where the add backs are going to go. So if you could go to the next slide, I'll explain what an add back is. So an add back is funding that's not included in the mayor's budget, but is added back into the budget by the Board of Supervisors. So essentially when the Board of Supervisors holds hearings on departments our budget and legislative analyst proposes cuts to those departments. And those cuts go into one big pool, like the law enforcement cuts. That's why they're so important that we defund law enforcement, because we know the mayor isn't going to put forward those really bold and brave steps that are going to redirect funding. So when the Board of Supervisors advocates for that funding to be cut from law enforcement departments, those can go directly into the causes that we care about and exactly into the things that we want to do. However, it's important to know the ad backs do not go to organizations. They go to causes or initiatives, even if it's proposed like by one organization, like homeless youth funding, even if that's proposed by Larkin Street Youth Services. The money can only go towards a cause, and then the department that money goes towards will decide where it goes. So that's one thing to know. The ad backs this year, of course, there's limited fund availability, but we don't really know what anything is going to look like due to COVID. We could have a lot of money with this new surplus that we have. However, a lot of the departments have already made a lot of cuts last year. So we don't know how many more new cuts we're going to be able to make, but we'll certainly be pushing for more. And the focus has shifted to be, in the beginning of ad backs, which is a fairly new thing, it was kind of based on like niche topics and like niche things in districts. But now it's kind of more focused on emergency response to COVID and more citywide things and limiting the cuts that would have otherwise have happened. So if you're not seeing district specific ad backs like we used to, that would be why, is there's a general more increase to look at citywide stuff. I think you can go to the next one. All right, so tips for how to get involved with the ad back process. It can be a really powerful tool that can open a lot of money for the things that you really care about, but it works best when you're in an organization like this one. And it's important to focus again on causes, not contracts. So you're not advocating for money for yourself, but instead for the things that you care about. And I recommend to every organization to join or learn more about the Budget Justice Coalition. They're vitally important in this city, and they're the way that a lot of progressive nonprofits and organizations such as this one join together and unite to make asks like for homeless provider services. And with that kind of united ask, there's a lot of power in that. So any organizations that you're a part of, if you want to advocate for a cause, Budget Justice Coalition is the place to do that. You also send us your ask if you're an organization so that we can advocate for you as well. If you're a District 5 organization, there's a little link there that I'm sure can be shared. And as individuals, you can find and support an organization that supports the causes that you care about, like defunding the police. You can join an organization that supports these causes. You can follow what the Budget Justice Coalition is up to. They used to have a lot of marches, a lot of protests, a lot of activist work that you can get involved in. And finally, the most important thing is public comment is really vitally important. It makes a big difference, even though by the time it gets to public comment, the decisions have pretty much already been made. It's really important that supervisors hear your public comment, and they have to. We had such a strong showing for defunding the police last year. There was about 120 public commenters, and I've been following the budget for almost a year now. Nothing has even gotten close to that level of showing up and that level of support. And it made a big difference, and it made an impact on a lot of supervisors. I know it did. So we can move on to the next slide. So I highly recommend public comment, and we'll talk more about ways that you can do that, and pass it off to Jen here.
Thank you, Anya. And just like some ideas of things, like I'm sure there are many things that folks would like to fund coming up, like the Haight-Ashbury Street Fair, something that usually gets funded through the ad back process. We funded a broken window program for small businesses. If their windows got smashed, we help reimburse some of that cost through ad backs. We are doing power washing of your all the commercial corridors now, starting on the 15th of this month. We're hoping that they actually start now. yeah, so, and then also tons and tons of like educational things we did, you know, for different youth programs in the Fillmore. And oftentimes, usually it's not like, it's like it's not guaranteed, but usually you get like $1 million to mess around with. Last year we didn't because of COVID, but we'll find out what we're gonna get. So don't be shy with that add back form. And Anya can toss it in the chat, and you know, you can let us know what you're thinking. But I do want to bring up that the way that we're going to be approaching this budget season is with an equity lens. That's just how we like to do it in Supervisor Preston's office. There's a lot of folks in the city who've been struggling. We've all been struggling through this pandemic. It has been incredibly emotionally, financially taxing in every way. And it's been brutal, but there are some folks who have really like haven't been able to work this entire time, or have been working in incredibly stressful conditions for not that much money, right, during this entire pandemic, or who are at risk of losing their housing, who are not aware of like the eviction moratoriums, and who are getting pushed out by disingenuous landlords. There are folks who really need help, and we're taking an equity lens, especially at this time, but all the time. But here's a non-exhaustive list of things that we're looking at as things that are going to need our attention in the budget this year. And of course, this is not everything. Like if you're like, what about resources for seniors? Or what about resources for youth or domestic violence? Like, absolutely. And, you know, I don't think, you know, there's some great lobbying groups like the Domestic Violence Consortium people, and, you know, all kinds of folks that come and lobby for us to support what's going to be what they're asking for from departments that, like, you know, would be passing them their money. And we are all in for like making sure that programs like for women, for children, for domestic violence survivors, for housing, all that stuff gets more money and not cut, even with COVID. There's other places to trim, we all know. So yeah, stuff that we're looking at is like anti-displacement work. Of course, we've got to make sure that the right to counsel still is funded. We're looking at solutions for that. We've got a ton of public housing in District 5 that's super neglected. Affordable housing, of course, and we're going to be looking at Prop I implementation and making sure that the money goes where it's supposed to go, and that we're able to make sure that folks' back rents are paid. And they don't, you know, get saddled with incredible debt from the crisis, from the pandemic. Homelessness is a huge one. I think that is something that everyone in the Haight has been touched by this in some way. And we are still fighting for that navigation center. It's a big priority of ours still. Obviously, congregate living was not an option during the pandemic, and so that was on ice, but we're edging out, and it's time to get serious about that again. We need a new family shelter in District 5. We need exits for transitional age youth out of homelessness. We know that definitely in the Haight. And one major thing that we want all of you to help support us on is making sure that every person in the safe sleeping site gets an exit. Right now, they're not being guaranteed those, and we have to make that happen because it's totally unacceptable for the safe sleeping site to close and folks to just be out on the street. That's just unacceptable. That is so backwards. So we can't let that happen. Of course, public safety is a big issue for everybody. We're really excited about the CART campaign. I know CART came and presented recently. It's an alternative response to homelessness. Cops don't want to deal with homelessness either. And there's got to be better ways here. So that's great. Other police alternatives, super welcome. Neighborhood lighting, traffic safety is a huge one. People are hit by cars all the time. We've got, these are just basic kind of ideas. And then of course, health and pandemic recovery. We've got to make sure that resources are getting to our hubs, and that places like high risk places like the Fillmore and Japantown are getting the vaccines that they need and the access to them. And of course, small business, folks are saddled with incredible debt from mounting, unpaid rent, and that has to be addressed. And then we are also working on the public bank, and planning on starting a working group there. So these are just a few of the things that we are thinking about doing, and lobbying for. You should join us and then tell us what else. Yeah. And then is this your part again, Anya?
Yeah, I can take it back over again.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. All right. Here's a list of the things that you can do. You should follow organizations that you care about. They get really active in San Francisco around the budget process, and they can let you know how you can specifically help them and how you can advocate for the kind of things that they care about. There's a list of a few organizations and causes that you might really care about to advocate for. And one that I'll highlight right here is the 30 Right Now campaign, which is to make 30% of your income the maximum amount that you can be charged for rent in public housing, which was passed by the supervisors, but is not being funded currently by HSH. So that's something that we're going to need to advocate for and to fight for in the future. And then you should contact your supervisor to let us know what you care about and what you are going to want, as well as joining us. That'll be on the next slide, but join us as well for our D5 budget town hall so that you can voice your opinion and we can start to have a little bit of the participatory budgeting that we want. There's our emails listed there. The first one is our staff email. I'll drop these in the chat afterwards. Jen's email and my email. You can CC all of us for any budget questions, add back questions, or to let us know generally what you care about. You can also contact the mayor and the board. Their emails are listed there. You might not necessarily get a response from all or any of them, but it's still important to voice your opinion. There's also the public comment day, which will be in June 25th, where you can really voice your thoughts and your feelings on this budget process. And somebody asked a really good question in the chat about how in President Yee's district, he made it so that his ad backs could be voted on by members of his district, where anybody who was 16 and up could submit a proposal for a one-time project like pedestrian safety, etc. And then D7 residents got to vote on that project. And it was really cool. And everybody would love to see more of that in our district. It might not be possible this year with COVID changing the way the ad backs are done to have less district specific ad backs, but I can easily say that participatory budgeting like this would be very welcome in our district. And I would even love to look into something like this. I think you can go to the next slide for a little list of calendar dates that would be important. So next week will be a hearing on how the extra money that Jen talked about, the $125 million that we discovered in our budget, how this is going to be spent. And there's a lot of proposals on the board, including our Prop I allocation, which needs to be done because the voters approved it, for social housing and rent relief. There's also some proposals for small business to waive some of their taxes and registration, some to reduce cuts to the Department of Public Health. So on that day, you'll be able to hear what the supervisors, departments, and mayor has to say. So you can call in on that day as well to leave public comment on any of these hearings. Next week or the week after will be on children, youth, and families, DCYF, and the city administrator, which sounds super boring, but actually houses the Department of Public Works, which is street cleaning, neighborhood lighting, and a bunch of other stuff. So it's one of the biggest city departments. It's like hidden inside of the city administrator's little part right there. And there'll be more hearings. I'll drop a link in the chat as well for Matt Haney's budget page. They'll update their budget calendar, and I highly encourage listening to these hearings. They're pretty short, but they're made so that the public can really understand what's going on inside the departments. And I've learned everything that I know about the budget from these hearings. So if you're really interested in an issue or a cause or a department, come and hear the hearing on them and let them hear your voice as well on Public Comment Day. And then on April 8th, save the date for the District 5 Budget Town Hall where we'll get your input to start to try to see what participatory budgeting is going to look like this year and what District 5 priorities really are. And then June 25th is public comment day on the budget. So you'll be able to call in or hopefully in person come and give public comment on the budget. And I think that's all for me.
I have a follow-up question on your timeline. Thank you. That was excellent. I think years ago I sat in on a ad back meeting and it was something. But regarding the public comment day, because you had mentioned that, you know, decisions had pretty much already been made by the time that meeting was held. You sent out the survey in our chat, so that's helpful. The idea of voting. What are some, I guess, strategies that you might suggest in trying to get a specific topic funded through ad backs?
I would say, you know, you guys are good organizers here in HANC, and I think getting as many, you know, coordinated, you know, email and calling campaigns. You're welcome to schedule meetings with us to express how important things are. And I think it's not just to us, because I generally feel like we're going to agree with you, but sending those requests to the mayor's office as well as they're forming this budget. And then honestly, it's like that town hall is really important, because that is gonna, that'll provide the mandate, you know, that that Chair Haney is going to need to see of how important it is, you know, for us to make sure things like making sure that everybody that from the safe sleeping site has an exit, not onto our streets, but into some either, you know, I've been talking with Larkin and Haya about what those different exits could be. And it's just, I think it's an issue that's going to touch this neighborhood really deeply. And it's one I think that we all wanted to be guaranteed when we started this, and we need to make sure that happens. So I would say, you know, old fashioned organizing, call us, write us, fill out that budget form. We're here to listen. Like we want the hate to be the place that you want it to be. So we're here to listen. And we're here to fight for our district. So we've got your back.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other comments or questions in the chat. Is there anybody on the phone who may have a question before Supervisor Preston's office of?
Yes, please.
Yes, go ahead.
This is Peter Warfield. I'm on the phone, and there are a lot of people in the city, speaking of equity, who do not have easy access or any access to computers. The City and County of San Francisco Data Equity Strategic Plan 2019 to 24 had some very telling statistics. Over 100,000 people without basic computer access. And of those people, the most affected are minorities, are older people, and are poorer people. So as somebody who cares about the library, I'm certainly concerned that the library is tilting for most of its services to cater for folks with computers, but in many cases doesn't even have your basic access via telephone or in person that you would expect folks who don't have access to the computer to still be able to use. So I'm very concerned about the larger question of access to computers, the lack of which really disenfranchises from social, from political life, from economic life, a whole range of people. The New York Times recently on March 1st had a story about seniors having difficulty because of difficulties when they get into computer internet access, and also just not even having the access that they need for getting vaccines. And I've noticed certainly a tremendous shutdown of the world of everything, including politics and the city, where you call offices that you used to be able to call 40 hours a week. Nobody's there. And they don't even tell you whether they're answering the phone. They tell you, oh, if you want information, you send us an email. So I think that there's a desperate need to get really serious about continuing to provide services for folks who do not have access who don't want to have access, who aren't very good with access to the internet. Again, it's certainly an equity question. And I think simple things like call forwarding, perhaps to cell phone, city-provided cell phones. There's a whole range of ways in which it seems as though for the non-computerized, the city has largely shut down, and including, by the way, the whole question of getting vaccines. There just seems to be an attitude that everybody has a cell phone, certainly a cell phone, but in particular access to computers. And I think that would be a really important project. And largely the people who aren't computerized are largely just invisible, especially to the world that's on the computer.
Great. Thank you, Peter. And that's definitely an issue that I think we've seen in this district, especially under COVID. You know, just trying to sign up my mom for COVID vaccine was a disaster, and I'm 40 and pretty familiar with the internet. So there's a huge gap, and I think that's an important thing for Supervisor Preston's office, but also I see Supervisor Chan is on here as well. So you're getting, you know, your money's worth with two supervisors' offices paying attention. So thank you. There was a comment that was made where, you know, as we're talking about ad backs, a request was made that we throw out that the SF planning over the next 2 weeks is going to have about 10 different topics discussing the general plan. And that has huge long-term ramifications for both the city and the budget and lots of things. So if you go on the SF planning website, SF planning, we'll post it in the messages. Also maybe send it out later through the voice, but we'll put it in the comments for a link if you want to participate in that. Yes, Olga, I see a question.
I just want to make a comment that, you know, I put in my, you know, when we first started, you know, in the chat, my whole thing about the moving violation on Page Street near a half a block from my house. But I had called numerous times to Dean's office and talked to activists who asked me, they were calling me too, asking me if I want to help campaign for Dean, which I have and have done that. And I love Dean and I'm glad that he is our supervisor, you know. But nobody ever called me back. So that was very frustrating because I must have called 6 or 7 times or talked to people 6 or 7 times, you know, saying, please, I need to talk to somebody about what happened because I feel like it was so unfair, you know, that my boyfriend and I got the moving violation right a half a block from my house on Page. Well, it was bad luck. A police officer just happened to be sitting there, you know, but it wasn't clearly marked. I don't want to go into it right now, but I'm just bringing this up right at this moment to say I never got a call back. And that really was disappointing because I'm an activist too. And I've done so much activist work and yet I didn't get it. You know, I didn't get my needs attended to. So
I'm sorry, Olga. Yeah. We checked there's a glitch in the matrix happening because we do have a team of fellows that checks that voicemail every day, and something went wrong, and I will go figure out what happened. I'm sorry about that, and yeah, I'll get in touch about.
But I mean, I left messages with fellow activists who were asking me to join in and the campaign, make calls for Dean, and those people kept saying they were going to, and I think they did. I don't know what happened, you know, in the whole deal. But it was kind of more heavy into the whole COVID excitement, so maybe that has something to do with it too.
There was a time there where we were pretty underwater, but yeah, still should have gotten a call back. Sorry about that.
Oh, thanks.
Great.
Thanks. It's still in process though, but I'll tell you more later as we go along with the meeting.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thank you. We'll carry that on to the slow Page Street later on in the meeting. Okay. I want to be respectful of both Supervisor Preston's office time and Supervisor Chan's office. So I'm going to thank you both Jen and Anya for presenting. We'll see you again, no doubt. You're welcome to hang out.
I'm going to hang out.
Great.
I'm a member, okay? So
yeah, no, great. So I do want to welcome Supervisor Connie Chan. As many of you know, back in late February, both Supervisors Chan and Peskin sent out a press release asking for an investigation of the Parks Alliance. Parks Alliance is a nonprofit organization and engages in gifts and donation agreements with city agencies. I always thought it was just Rec and Park, but the more I read about the Nuru scandal, which I'll set up a summary later on, Parks Alliance was kind of dead in the middle of that. Having been to many meetings with Parks Alliance folks, I feel bad for them. But I also think that it's very important that these questions be asked. One of the things I think many people are frustrated with when it comes to government, regardless of your standing or views of government, is a lack of transparency. And when the FBI is arresting people, former employees of the city, and they are throwing out very obvious connections, it doesn't hurt to ask questions. So, if your attitude is we shouldn't be asking questions, maybe you aren't concerned about government representing its citizens. So we would, and I'll take a quick shot, that's probably the same line of people who believe a Board of Education should be appointed by the mayor. But with that, I do want to welcome Supervisor Chan to our meeting. She's gonna give a little background as to why you're digging a little deeper and maybe a little background with Rec and Park. So welcome, Supervisor Chan, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, James. Well, I'm glad to be here. I think the Parks Alliance, frankly, I'm glad that James kind of really actually have met some of those people. So you kind of feel bad for them and because you think that they may be trying to do some good work. And I kind of agree, generally speaking, especially, the fact that I've been in city government for the last, 15 something years now, actually more, that, sometimes you work with folks and you always trying to, because you're doing the best you can, you're thinking so are other people, right? Like, I think that's generally how I think of them. But I do ask questions. I think in this case, it really came from starting out with the wheel just in the South, and because we just took office January 8th, and we just trying to like do our thing. Suddenly I'm start to see, and frankly, I wasn't quite paying attention thinking about the wheel. I really thought, probably like most people, my neighbors thought that it was a 150th anniversary. I thought it was like, okay, a wheel, but you know what? It's temporary. It was going to go away. Sure. And then pandemic hits, and I'm sure everybody experienced that when you're in pandemic mode, just a lot of things was kind of a blur, and not to mention I was campaigning. So I wasn't paying attention of the wheel until when we took office. I still think that was going to go away. Little did I know that suddenly I started to get a lot of emails, and I'm looking through them, and they were mentioning about a 4-year extension. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Since when from a 150th anniversary for like a temporary 1 year, now suddenly it's a 4-year extension. I asked Rec and Park, right now that I'm a district supervisor, what's going on there? And, because of my experience, I was like, let me see a staff report. So I got a staff report about it. But I kind of skimmed through it, and so the communities who come in, I haven't got a briefing why we're asking for 4 years.
We're losing.
You're losing me?
That's me, and my apologies.
Yeah, you're okay. We can hear you.
Okay. And so when I saw all these letters, I do too have the concern, light, generator, and wanting to just kind of understand a little bit more. So I kind of talked to Supervisor Peskin, and I was like, hey, you know what? Like, I think I know how this process worked, that they're going to the Historic Preservation Commission. What do you think? And he's like, well, you should just let them know, like, you're trying to figure this out, as any supervisor would. So I did that. But interestingly, Rec and Park sort of, instead of be able to say, oh, wow, the supervisor has concern, let's try to address this, they really move forward with it without talking to me or any of my colleagues, even though I say I'm not the only one. Supervisor Dean Preston too have concern about this. That was interesting to see just how they mobilize and trying to push for a 4-year without a lot of justification. That is when I think my instinct was like, well, then let me really understand where is this going? What is this about, terms and conditions and installations? And most importantly, the money. Right, because I think we all know, follow the money. When people are so gung-ho about something, you follow the money. I did. And I looked into it and I saw this very specific clause in this permit, which flagged for me was, you know, all this revenue, $1 per adult tickets, and I think 75 cents or 50 cents per senior and child tickets actually goes to Parks Alliance. But not only that, it's the Parks Alliance to cover for a Golden Gate Park 150th anniversary expenses. So that kind of becomes a red flag for me, just for someone who has been working in city government for a long time, that if you're ever really generating any type of revenue, why would it ever go to a third party? It doesn't matter, is it a nonprofit or anyone else. It should always come to the city's general fund or that department. That it's always what I would flag. Now, once I start asking questions, it seems to me that people did not want me to ask that question. And as stubborn as I am, the more you don't want me to ask, I think the more that there must be something there. And so therefore I ask, is there a Golden Gate Park 150th anniversary contract? Apparently it does not exist either. So how do I know if the contract doesn't exist? How do I know how much it is for this event celebration in terms of expenses? And meanwhile, just everybody should know, you know, charter section 9.118, it says that for every, you know, contract over $1 million, it should come to the board supervisor for approval. Obviously, none of my colleagues have ever seen a contract that is called Golden Gate Park 150th anniversary contract. Now that again is another problem. Why would the board never see or approve? Meanwhile, the examiner article came out to say that according to the department, Rec and Park Department and Parks Alliance themselves, that there is supposed to be a Golden Gate Park 150th anniversary events that is supposed to cost or involved or generate whatever it is, $1.9 million. Now that it comes to like, now it just, no answers to questions that I originally have 2 weeks ago. Now more questions generated after I ask him more questions. So here we are. Why I really am glad that Supervisor Peskin is and frankly also Supervisor Dean Preston. He actually is behind the scene and helping us. Like I'm asking some of the questions like, where do we go? And I think, you know, from here, like Supervisor Peskin identified that, you know, the charter 4.113, you know, that they need the board's 2/3 vote in order for them to have a structure. But frankly, right now the debate is it permanent or is it temporary, which is kind of insane. And then meanwhile, you know, Supervisor Dean Preston really helped me, you know, flag the question, if it actually trigger requirement for approval for the Historic Preservation Commission for the certificate of appropriateness, how would it not actually trigger, which is a appointed body, how would then not actually trigger the board's approval, a elected body? So all those are, which is to say, I'm saying to you, all these are the questions that are ahead of us that we have no answer and that we're hoping to get more of that maybe coming Monday. I think the agenda is probably posted for the Rules Committee. I think we're going to ask some questions really about this wheel. And so when I say that it's really beyond the wheels now, it's actually it's about good and clean government. I think that we really have a solid ground here to ask those questions, because no answers to any of the questions asked, and still there's no answer about the expenses. Still no answer why this money is actually going to Parks Alliance, who I think James kind of talked about, you know, it's actually has been under part of FBI investigation. And I just don't think that's a good practice. It raises the question whether it actually contribute to pay to play. Some of you probably know Parks Alliance that also raise funds for political campaigns, you know, and many other sorts. So when that money, public money generated from publicly owned land going to a organization like this, where's that money going? What does it cover? So I hope that kind of does not answer any of our questions, but just kind of so that you know what are our questions.
Well, I think that's
and why we're doing this. Yeah.
I think that's a great background as to why digging a little deeper, right? Because it's been turned into the Ferris wheel. Who cares about Ferris wheel? Well, the fun police this, the fun police that. But it's, you know, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I don't think anybody in this meeting who's been paying attention to the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council for the last 10 years is going to argue with you that there are some, let's just say, shady things that have happened in Reckin Park for quite some time. And so during the hearing, I know it's just in committee on Monday, but if it goes on to the full board, are you going to be pulling in any people from the Parks Alliance or Reckin Park to testify and answer questions?
So the Monday hearing, the chair is Rules Committee Chair is Supervisor Aaron Peskin. I am trying to figure out how to communicate this with him, but I think he has some ideas what the hearing would be, how it's structured and what it would be about. And I kind of look to his leadership, but I'm eager, frankly, I'm eager to ask those questions publicly. I see that there's questions out there to see if we actually have talked to Parks Alliance directly. I have actually tasked that to the controller's office and our budget analyst. And here's why. I think that it is best for transparency and for accountability is that we do some investigation and we task our controllers and we task, budget analysts who are independent, in terms of as a department to do this type of audit and investigation. And if I were to question Parks Alliance, I would like it to be a public forum, and not a private meeting, so that there's no he said or they said, I said kind of situation. I want them to publicly answer my questions for everybody to see their answers. And I think that's the key. So I have yet to talk to them directly.
No, I think that's great. Our experience is, both in behind the scenes meetings and public meetings, they're very important things to bring up. A question came up of where it can be watched, or is it going to be streamed on the Board of Supervisors website on Monday?
Yeah, SFG TV is, if you type in and then you probably pick one of the channels, then and you can watch that. Okay,
great. And I know that historically, well, the general superintendent of Reckin Park is appointed by the mayor, and he's been there a long time and been through many mayors, well connected. So that's why I asked the question about what sort of public meetings are going to be held. I'm going to open up to other questions. I see a hand for somebody who's on the phone. It might go back to Jen Snyder and Anya's presentation. I'm not sure, but I want to be respectful of their hand. The 579-4844 number, your hand was up. I'll ask you to unmute if you have that question. It's also possible. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, it did start with Jen, but I'll email her separately. Connie, this is Karen Fishkin. And I just wanted to say, I don't have a question at this point. I just wanted to say, I am delighted to hear this presentation by you. I love your energy and your thinking and your process. And I look forward to your term in office. I think it's going to be very exciting.
Thank you, Karen.
Are there some other questions? Now, I heard that you mentioned that you've worked for city government for quite some time. Did you work in or associated with Reckin Park?
I did. I work. So I started out as an aide to Supervisor Sophie Maxwell, and then I worked for at the DA's office for Kamala Harris, and then I did work for Rec and Park actually under Phil Ginsburg, which if you can imagine to my like this when I asked these questions and the answers that I was getting, I'm sure you can sense in some way my frustration, because I think that they're speaking to someone who really know them and really know how the department works. And if I'm asking these questions, I would think, and that I find it problematic. I would hope that it was taken seriously, but I don't think that it was answered. Like my questions were not answered, and I really think that I have legitimate concerns. So I really hope that kind of tells you if I have concern, I have worked in under the department, and I have seen contract, I have seen other stuff, maybe not as closely as I maybe should have, now that I'm thinking back. And I also want to say this too, I was surprised and to learn about Parks Alliance and Mohammed in January. And I was surprised. And I think that for me, if for any city government at that moment, they should pause. I would have paused. I think if you didn't know about the dealings, with Mohammed and Parks Alliance, I think for any city agency, once you learn that, I think for good government, your first reaction will be, let me pause this relationship and let me try to understand the operation of this organization before you move forward with any type of contract. And so the question would be for Rec and Park to still engage after that the Mohammed Nuru situation came to light, and yet they still engage with it and having a contract that the revenue generated still going to Parks Alliance without any further type of investigation, or at least a completion of an investigation. I honestly question whether that is a good government practice. And I think that given, and I'm grateful, frankly, I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to run for office, that I'm grateful to have the opportunity to be elected in office, to be like put in this position and be empowered to ask the questions that perhaps, frankly, in the past, I wasn't empowered to ask. Supervisor Aaron Peskin kind of was joking at some point, and maybe this is more of a personal comment. He's like, this is your coming out moment. And it is, being able to be empowered to ask the questions. So I hope that kind of answered your question too.
I think that's great.
I'm going to butt in for a second, Yeah. Hi, Connie. How are you? It's Bruce Wolf. I just also want to note that there's a bigger relationship with Rec and Park Department, with Parks Alliance. They manage probably over 70 programs under of activities. These are athletics or sports activities or what have you for Rec and Park. So, Parks Alliance, has their fingers, strings, tentacles, I don't know what you want to call it, but they're, pretty deep in various aspects of city government here.
Well, you've mentioned that, and I found out recently that Dennis Herrera's wife is either currently on the board or formerly on the board of the Parks Alliance. And, try not to be too conspiratorial because it's easy to go down rabbit holes. But when the FBI is kicking tires and the city attorney is not, there's just sometimes when the connections are too close, it's like, well, at the very least, the city needs to step back, like you said, Supervisor Chan, needs to step back, take a deep breath, and, figure out, do an audit, get the comptroller, dig deeper, do a neutral audit. I work for the federal government. It ain't pretty sometimes, but we have the Office of Inspector General who will come in and do an audit if complaints. And it seems like there's no oversight in the city. And time again, various agencies and people within the city just kind of stonewall. So very much looking forward to this. I'm going to put it on my calendar of things to watch. I saw a question came in for you, Supervisor Chan. How do you feel the Rec and Park, DPW, SFMTA high-handed tactics can be brought to an end and more citizens can be brought into the decision-making process. I'm assuming that has to do along the lines of there are some agencies, including Rec and Park and DPW, that have very little oversight by citizens.
It was actually the first thing I did when we took office. When the first day that we be able to do roll call introduction for legislation, that I submitted a letter inquiry again to the controller and to the budget analyst, is to actually ask and evaluate what now known as the Barbara Kaufman 1996 Charter Amendment really changed the structure that how our city operates. And what I asked in that letter of inquiry is that I would like to have an understanding and evaluation of the structure of our city administrator's office. The city administrator oversees about 27 city departments, over a $700 million of city budget that goes under city administrator's office. And a lot of times that the city administrator does play that role of facilitating among commissions and city departments. And the city administrator also oversees what we call a capital planning committee. So all which is to say, the city administrators actually holds a lot of power of our day-to-day city government operations. And so the first thing that I did was I would like to evaluate best practices of city administrator. And I see that question, like city administrator answers to really directly to the mayor and mayor alone. And while the appointment approval process does come to the board for approval, once the board approved the position, that's kind of all the board can do. So that's why I did that letter inquiry. I'd like to understand the power structure, the best practices for that city administrator, like management in terms of our city departments. Because I think once we start questioning that and how our city government together is structured and who answer to whom, like in who oversee, our city department, and really also a consistency of equal power and equal accountability among our city and commissioners. That is actually also key, because our commissions, as you can see, frankly, some of them really just rubber stamp of what is being presented to them by our city departments. So how do we then hold our city administrator accountable, our city commissions and commissioners all across board accountable, which then hold our city departments accountable? I think those are really the questions that I'm asking, and I'm really looking forward to having that report hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So I think all this work that we've kind of been doing in the last couple of months are coming ahead. It takes a little time to plant that seed and for it to sprout, and hopefully we'll come to harvest sooner. Actually, hopefully very soon, because I'm eager to learn all of those answers, especially as we're heading to budget season.
Well, and do you have a few more minutes? I know you've been in meetings for probably the last 12 hours. So, it's supposed to be the end of your day, but do you have a couple more minutes? I imagine there might be more questions. One is, who does the city administrator answer to? I believe it's the mayor. Is that correct?
Yep, the mayor.
Yeah. Are there?
And that's also kind of that is why the charter amendment from 1996 from former Supervisor Barbara Kaufman creates this structure now that we're tackling with, that I want answer to. It's like this current structure, not just the people, right? But the structure itself allows this culture of pay to play fester, and that we maybe need to really restructure this the way that our city government is structured, in order for us to break down some of the barriers for people to be more compelled to whistleblower programs. Or how do we make sure that people really are being held more accountable to our Sunshine Task Force, our Ethics Commission, all of those? Can we do is there a better way to manage our city government that is a lot more transparent and has a lot more accountability? And that goes back to the original question about decision-making process. Perhaps if we can restructure our city government in a way that really makes sense and transparent, then perhaps that decision-making process is a lot less cumbersome for our everyday residents and workers to understand and to be engaged in.
It's interesting. You mentioned the rubber stamping of appointed commissions. And that was actually the reason I joined the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council and joined the board years ago, is having gone to commission meetings and spending 2 hours, taking time off work, sitting there and speaking, and then looking at them, and decisions had already been made. They don't, a lot of time they're not listening at all. And it's concerning when people are pushing for more elected bodies to be appointed by the mayor. I've found that many of the elected bodies tend to be more representative of the city, but when the appointed bodies tend to be representative of much smaller sections of the city. And I think that, democracy is messy, but having elected boards is very important, because it gives people, like, we gave non-citizens are able to vote for the school board, and their kids are going to school, public schools, right? Where, if it wasn't an elected official, it would be the say of the mayor, and, regardless of the mayor, I don't care who it is.
Well,
So,
I mean, I think it's a very interesting argument that doesn't really I don't think, in my opinion, holds in terms of thinking that it's better to be appointed than elected. Because let's be frank, if you're not happy with your elected official, you can always recall them. Not that a route that I would ever suggest everybody to do. I would always say, we elected them, let's respect the people's vote, and let's make sure that whoever is holding that office, let's hold them accountable. Let's make sure they do the right thing. Let's keep questioning them. But if they have committed, especially if a criminal act, yes, let's recall them. Let's make sure that they step down and resign and put all those pressure on. And that really typically can be done when you're elected office. But even an appointed office, there's no other way to get someone to resign other than, or to step down or recall and get rid of them, other than asking them to resign or having the appointed the appointed authority to get rid of them. That just, I don't think that makes sense. I absolutely agree with you, James. It has to be elected. And if we already invested money and resources to hold elections for these, for the board education, let's keep with it. And in fact, I always am like, if we can elect more positions that are elected rather than appointed, I think it's only better for democracy. So I agree.
Yeah, well, thank you. The question came in that I think somebody wants to have an answer during your hearing. That I guess the city attorney had ruled, made a decision regarding the Ferris wheel not needing a board of supervisors, and the fact that his wife is connected to the Parks Alliance. I think they'd love to get an answer of whether that's a conflict of interest. And so I will leave it at that. I will be respectful of your time. Again, you are welcome to stay and hang out with us and keep answering questions. We love it. But I also want to be respectful of your time. So don't be shy and say, I got to go.
Well, my family is waiting for me to have dinner. I have to be honest. You probably heard a lot of beeping. It's like, it's the oven, it's the microwave. It's all happening. And my partner is trying very hard to keep my 7-year-old quiet for this. But I would love for you to, if you have time, listen in on the Monday Rules Committee. And if you even have more time to make public comment, it is interesting to me. That folks are spending time gathering signature and making comments, and then they call in to tell us that we shouldn't be spending time questioning about the wheels. It was fascinating to me because I find it ironic, and that kind of helped me to say that means I had this conversation with Supervisor Dean Preston too, and I love that spirit, and I really admire that, and I learned a lot from him. Is that like when people try to shame you and like trying to push you for asking the questions, you know you got the right question and you're going to hold on to it and you're going to keep asking that question. That I think he's also a very brilliant attorney. So I'm going to take that good advice of his and I'm going to keep on asking those questions definitely on Monday. And I look forward to perhaps have your feedback as well. You know, if you listen in or if you call in public comments and if you find certain answers to you that you may have feedback on, it's like, hey, maybe Connie, you should think about these type of questions or ask these questions. I'm happy to be on the floor and ask those questions for you too. And because I think that is our job. Our job is, you know, to be, when we say that to be the voices of the people, don't have the time and, you know, can't be at the table to ask those questions. That's our job. And so whatever questions you got, you didn't get a chance to ask or you would like to ask, feel free to email me. I'm going to share my email address here in this, and I check my email definitely over the weekend as well. So if you have any questions that you think I could ask on Monday, please email me and or any questions that you'd like me to answer but didn't get a chance to ask or I didn't get a chance to answer right now, feel free to do so.
Great.
And I check my own emails, so.
Thank you and thank your family. I have a 7 and 4-year-old and I owe my wife about 5 nights worth of bedtimes because she's been dealing with both of them for about an hour and a half. So thank your family and thank you for your time this evening. Thank you. And Jen, good to see you. I didn't get a chance to see Jen in person, even though we both work in City Hall. So good to see you like virtually.
You too.
Bye.
See you soon. Bye.
Take care.
All right. So yeah, that was great. I think it's a good segue. I have a PowerPoint presentation that we'll get started. That's just a handful of slides. I know that PowerPoints can be kind of boring, but you know I'll let Bruce bring it up and then jump in. But the first slide is what just happened here. The first slide is basically talking about the Nuru scandal, a little summary from when he was arrested. And Bruce, you have the PowerPoint, right? Can you share your screen? There you go. Thank you. So I, aptly titled our PowerPoint, "The Fun Police," because, we have a history with Mayor Breed back to when she was a supervisor. And, maybe I am a little egotistical and it's not about us, but sometimes it feels like a comment coming out of their direct shot at us. So next slide. So here's a quick summary of the Nuru scandal. He was arrested in January of 2020, over a year ago. London Breed has been tied to it. Willie Brown, was quoted saying that he supports a little bit of corruption as long as nobody's injured or killed. We're all paying higher garbage rates, although I guess nearly $100 million is going to be credited back in some way, but it's never a 1-to-1 ratio. I'm sure they made more than that. What was interesting, though, is that going back to the Parks Alliance, over a 4.5-year period, $1 million was laundered through the Parks Alliance. And they say that they were working on formalizing agreements with DPW, but were basically told that to bugger off. So it was pretty interesting digging into the story. I got a lot of information here from Mission Local as well as 48 Hills. Oddly enough, the people who are donating through the Parks Alliance funds of that $1 million or near $1 million, I believe earned over, I have it here, $570 million in city contracts through Public Works. So going back to the pay to play, it pays to have friends in high places. I don't know. So during the scandal, the controller zeroed in on the friends organizations like the Parks Alliance. And again, they were trying to formalize a relationship with Public Works, but that never happened. What's interesting is 5 defendants arrested by the FBI, not city police or sheriff or anybody like that, have flipped. And most recently, the Sandra Zuniga, who's the former member of Mayor Leeds' Mayor Breed, excuse me, staff, and was the head of DPW's Fix It team, just flipped, I think, last week. So, looking at the details, 33 out of the 56 city departments have nonprofit friends groups, and there are 588 accounts that are spent on city activities. So, going back to, look, it might be nothing with Parks Alliance. They might have just been an unwilling group, and I feel for them. I think there's a lot of good that is done, but at the same time, questions need to be asked and it needs to be dug in. So next slide. So going into the Ferris wheel and corruption, because the Ferris wheel is just the symbol now of everything in San Francisco. I wanted to go back and highlight why the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council was opposed to it. First off, a 4-year extension for a 1-year plan is pretty ridiculous, right? I feel bad that COVID ruined Golden Gate Park's 150th anniversary, but you won't find a ton of sympathy for Rec and Park in this room. Trust was lost with Rec and Park years ago, whether it's anti-homeless policies, lack of Lava May and Tenderloin pit stops willingness to put it in Rec and Park facilities, adding security cameras, undermining the 730 stand-in interim use, and of course, the recycling center. So those are all recent examples of how Rec and Park has been involved or not in the Haight-Ashbury. So, there's plenty to discuss. And, Rec and Park administration has created policies to close the park to the public. But of course, we're the ones who are not fun, right? So to recap, the members of the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council are generally use Golden Gate Park for safe, quiet recreation. Our members appreciate the history of the music concourse, but don't buy the hype that the Ferris wheel is a historic aspect of Rec and Park. By that argument, it's using criteria of 6 months of new installations mean something's historic. And by that argument, my kids love the now historic hot dog carts that are in the park. So, you should visit those hot dog carts. You can get ice cream there too. On top of that, the diesel generator that's constantly running, you can poo-poo environmental arguments, this or that. It could be tied into the electric grid. And we live in a city that's going to have billions of dollars of infrastructure improvements needed because of global warming. So, what kind of message are we passing along? And then finally, the questioning the economic rationales of Rec and Park. Supervisor Chan had mentioned some of that a little bit, but arguing that the wheel attracts thousands of new visitors to Golden Gate Park is ridiculous. I visit the museum concourse regularly with my kids. I've waited in lines for food trucks in excess of 30 minutes, and this is during times that the Ferris wheel was closed. So telling me that the Ferris wheel is the reason people are visiting Golden Gate Park is pretty ridiculous. And generally, the enduring desire for people to go to Golden Gate Park is the natural aspect. That's what gets people out to Golden Gate Park during the pandemic and after, not a Ferris wheel. So second, the Rec and Park thinks that the extension of 4 years will attract tourists to Golden Gate Park. I mean, I work in the tourist industry. Tourism is down, but that's another, let's just say, less than legitimate argument in many of our minds. And in many ways, the income, that's one of the arguments they brought in. The income from the Ferris wheel is a rounding error. I mean, we're talking about, I think the total was $100,000 that's being filtered through the Parks Alliance. And so, every argument they've come up with, and this reminds me of fighting Rec and Park playgrounds and sand is, they said, oh, needles, glass, and poop. And it was none of that. It had to do with operational costs. And so, you know, I look forward to Supervisor Chan and Peskin's investigation to find out what the real answers behind the interest in keeping the Ferris wheel an extended period. So next slide. So I took this picture of the Rec and Parks Golden Gate Park website, and you know, they have a bunch of items there. Was it 10 different things like attractions of Golden Gate Park? You should check this out. So if somebody could point out in you know, these highlights of Rec and Park and Golden Gate Park's mission of where adding an amusement park comes in. I was trying to figure that out and I couldn't quite do it. So, you know, even their own information doesn't support it. Next slide. So I think it's time to move on from the Ferris wheel, right? We've talked about it enough. I look forward to the information that comes out. I think many of us do. And let's move on to the Panhandle, right? An extension of Golden Gate Park. The Panhandle was last redone in 2014. I still have the panels that Rec and Park project management staff brought to our meeting and people wrote on them. They're up in my attic. But much of the Panhandle improvements were, you know, nothing more than just repaving the paths. And, you know, there was a lot that was left undone. Drainage has never been addressed. You know, there's some vast areas of grass that are great. You know, people use them, but if there's been any rain recently, and if there's a high groundwater content, many parts of the Panhandle become mushy and are unusable. The paths were never widened. That seems like the easiest solution in so many ways of the multi-use paths. The concrete areas over in the Panhandle, mostly between Masonic and Clayton, were never repaved except for the basketball court. Anybody have an idea of, you know, whether it was public or private money that ended up paying for the basketball court? Yeah, it was the Warriors. So again, the one improvement of the non-paths in the Panhandle was done through private funds. And then the play areas are overcrowded. You know, within the Panhandle, like I mentioned, I have 2 young kids. You can see my 4-year-old there breaking rules during COVID and doing some exercising on one of the adult exercise items there. There's not a lot of space for kids to roller skate or skateboard. While there's a lot of pavement, it's very bumpy and very tough. So we end up using the basketball courts, which is not fair to the basketball folks. So next slide. So here are some suggestions that we have for Panhandle improvements. You know, repave the existing swaths of concrete. I know concrete isn't popular, but there are reasons why it's there. For example, the large section between Masonic and Ashbury is designated as an emergency response area. So if there's a giant earthquake or some other catastrophe, that's an area where this FEMA or city or whomever can lay out a response area and tents and such. So it's necessary. You know, make the grass multi-use, whether that's creating fenced-in dog areas or improving drainage. You know, it's kind of funny that there's so much opportunity in the Panhandle. It's an amazing piece of land, green space, but there's very little room for revenue generation. And I think there's a theme here. There's a picture on this slide of private scooters taking up all of the bike racks in the Panhandle there. So it seems like there's a reluctance from Rec and Park to do any improvements unless there's some way to generate revenue. You know, I know a couple years ago there was Prop B, which was estimated to double Rec and Park's base budget over a 10-year period. So Other ideas, you know, the bocce courts out at Stanion have been very popular in many ways, creating more recreational facilities, managing the forest there. So not in a response, in a, what am I trying to say? Not in a manner that is responding to fallen tree branches, but actively managing the trees, plant young ones, start a transition. Because in a couple of years, those giant trees are going to be gone, and there's no plan to plant new ones. Let's see, you know, maybe take that adult gym area, which I was skeptical of, the previous slide with my 4-year-old hanging out there. I was skeptical of that adult play area, but I think it's been great, you know, very popular. But why can't it be spread throughout the Panhandle? It doesn't necessarily need to be in that one place. It seems like it could be better utilized and spread out throughout the Panhandle, and then use that area for other recreational possibilities. You know, maybe add the chess tables that used to be next to the basketball court that were removed by Rec and Park. But ultimately, you know, I think Rec and Park owes the community a comprehensive Panhandle plan. Like I mentioned before, I see the Panhandle as as poorly treated, we'll just say that, by Rec and Park. So, yeah, so I'll leave it at that. Are there some thoughts? I see some thoughts in the comments in the chat, so that's great. If you have suggestions for the Panhandle improvements, I don't know if it's easiest to just send an email through the HANC website, or not sure, but we want to open it up to all ideas. I don't think decisions are necessarily going to be made tonight, because it's something that will probably take many months, if not years, to come up with a comprehensive plan. But I think these are all things that need to be pushed. So is there a question?
I don't see.
No.
How do we question?
Just start talking.
You just go for it. I hear you.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, my name's Greg Garr. I was on the board for a long, long time. This is kind of weird doing it this way, but I wanted to make a little comment about the history of Golden Gate Park. And that is, when the Midwinter Fair ended in 1894, John McLaren got his workmen to put explosives under the Bonet Electric Tower, which was 300 feet tall, and blow it up so he could return the park back to the Sylvan Retreat it was meant to be. So that was just a little bit of humor.
No, it's great. Thank you. Well, let's move on, because I know the Panhandle, you know, is just a little part of this, but let's go on to the next section, because I think, oh yeah, go ahead.
I just want to add that one of the reasons why Rec and Park is trying to generate new revenue is they're trying to become an enterprise agency so that they can operate as a third rail of government, and neither the mayor or the board of supervisors will have any authority on them, much like the MTA or the PUC or the Port Authority or the airport.
And as a city agency, they should be answering to us. They shouldn't be an independent entity that does whatever they so choose. I think Supervisor Chan definitely brought out some of those reasons as well. So, you know, it was interesting at the last board meeting when we brought up the ideas of permanent JFK and a permanent slow Page Street. You know, I know we definitely have a reputation of, you know, not necessarily wanting change and being curmudgeons and being against a lot of things. But, you know, I think there's a lot of great ideas from the board, the membership, and, you know, with a global pandemic, once in 100-year activity, hopefully, even not again in our lifetimes, it gives us such a great opportunity to re-envision what the city and the park really should be for the citizens. And I like the idea of more performances in Golden Gate Park, artists, right? That's great. You know, one of the question is, should we create a permanent JFK, closed JFK, whether it's to the crossover or further or shorter? You know, but there are some issues that definitely need to be addressed. One of the things with just closing it during COVID, you know, there isn't a public process to discuss these issues. And I think one of the glaring issues is a lack of accessible parking in and around Golden Gate Park. We've learned that before leaving office, Supervisor Fewer set up a group to meet and discuss concerns and fixes, including accessibility being shut down. They've met multiple times, and at some point a plan will be presented to the group, not our group, but this group that had been set up. And based on the discussions, theoretically a decision will be pushed. Don't know how that's going to all play out. There are some people who are participating in this group are going to ask for additional meetings so they can digest the plan. And I think that's a great idea, because so many times, you know, we have presentations and then it is pushed that, you know, decision is made. So Kristen, you had a question?
Actually more of a comment about
Sure.
how far along the JFK closure plans are. One of the other organizations that I'm on, their legislative committee, is the Council of District Merchants Association. That's the Association of Merchant Associations. And they've received communications that it's pretty much a done deal that the JFK closure will be made permanent. And they are just now starting the process of mobilizing with the museums to oppose that. So it is an interesting thing that it seems like the decision has been made. I don't know if Jen Snyder can comment on that, but it sounds like there's a lot of agreement within City Hall about keeping it closed, but there's some interested parties that are going to try to push back on that.
And, you know, and that's why we're asking these questions. You know, it seems like it's going to happen, but there are some significant issues that need to be figured out. And maybe it's as simple as converting the parking lot behind the band shelter to an accessible parking lot and then running shuttles up and down JFK, right? Like on, I think it's weekends, they have a shuttle that runs the length of JFK. It might be something as simple as that, but if these solutions aren't being proposed, I don't think many of us have a ton of faith that the people who manage Golden Gate Park are going to be asking questions and coming up with solutions. You know, more of a public process should occur. If it's going to be permanent, they should be asking neighbors in the Sunset, in the Richmond, in the Haight, people in the outer Sunset, people who drive through or bike through or walk through. You know, it's important to ask the citizens the best way to do it. And, you know, there are a lot of great solutions out there. I think personally, I think it's a good idea, closing JFK permanently. But if certain things aren't figured out, you know, like my 80-year-old mother who doesn't ride a bike and can't walk long distances, wants to meet my family at, you know, the museum concourse, is it going to take her 45 minutes by public transit, right? These things need to be improved. So, you know, I think a lot of obstacles can be overcome, but, and I see the comment about the 44, you know, yes, the 44 exists, but how frequently does it come through? And, you know, they have a shuttle that already runs on JFK on certain days. Those are the kinds of things that I think can make a huge difference for those folks who, you know, have accessibility concerns. So what are some thoughts on, I want to open it up for about 5 minutes on some ideas for, you know, what needs to be fixed.
I had a comment or question?
Yes, go ahead.
On the phone?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Peter Warfield again. I'm not really au courant on the discussions, but the Panhandle as a bicycle freeway where they're zooming at top speeds, I guess I find a little disconcerting. And especially if I'm coming from the north side near Golden Gate Park, whatever the next street, I guess, is it Schrader? When you're coming from the north to cross over to enter the Panhandle, there's an outlet that comes off of the bicycle path, and they're zooming with their bikes on the very same path that you're trying to walk into the Panhandle on. So that just seems very unrelaxing and nerve-wracking because you got to really watch out because they're zipping along at quite a huge speed.
Yeah, along those lines.
Bikes are great, but a bicycle freeway is not. I don't know that it's compatible with walking and calm enjoyment.
Some serious solutions and planning need to be thought about when it comes to bicycling. I know years ago the bike lanes along Oak and Fell were brought to the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council, and I was one who wrote an article against them. I'm still against the bike lanes to a certain degree. I think the one on Fell has been okay. I ride it. I also ride in the Panhandle, and that transition at Masonic is terrifying. You know, there was a woman who was recently, I think just this week, nearly killed crossing the Kezar thoroughfare from JFK. Like, there's just a lack of planning, comprehensive planning, that I think is common. Especially, you know, we've been living through the Haight Street realm process for how many years? 5. Haight Street's been under construction. There's just so much poor planning that could be done better to make everybody's lives better, whether it's the bicyclists, the pedestrians, the people driving. And that's, I think, one of the frustrations many of us have. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to present this and, you know, open it up to, you know, a forum of what are the solutions that need to be developed. So, you know, those who don't bicycle or aren't able to walk long distances or aren't able to drive and are still scared of Muni because of COVID, you know, wanting to do it JFK. I see a comment about the garage. You know, the parking garage under the museums is something like $25 for a 4-hour visit. It's quite expensive, you know, and so some things that benefit the overall citizens and visitors of San Francisco need to be developed on that. Yes, Kristen.
Well, I just know that Robert Fruckman is on the call. And Robert, I think you and I were chatting on Twitter that you know the person that's organizing the campaign for car-free JFK. If you have that information that you want to put in the chat to share with folks or announce it, that'd be great.
Hi, Kristen. This is Robert Fruckman. I don't actually know who's working on car-free JFK. I haven't been involved in that discussion at all, but if I hear anything, you know, I'll pass it along.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Good to put a voice to the Twitter handle. You know, you've been giving us lots of publicity, and, you know, they say there's no such thing as bad publicity, right? Twitter is very much like San Francisco politics. It's a knife fight in a phone booth. So, Kristen, do you still have your hand up, or no? Good. So let's. I think we've touched upon JFK. You know, it's very much like Page Street. So let's go on to the next slide. And Page Street. You know, again, it's been great. You know, I was a little hesitant. I can be a little bit of a curmudgeon, get off my lawn, even though I sometimes people call me an old man. But Page Street, you know, has been a safe place for a lot of people. But as pointed out, there are a lot of bicycle riders, skateboarders, cars that are not following safety rules, whether it's you know, on Page Street or in the Panhandle or JFK. I keep remembering there's a gentleman who always wears a yellow reflective jacket and rides on JFK in the bike lane. And if you're walking in the bike lane, even though the entire road is open, he will ride up behind you and yell at you. You know, there's always going to be folks like that. But I think how we can make it a safer spot is important. And a comment coming in on Page Street is that cars aren't supposed to go onto the street and that it should be enforced. And I would say, as somebody who lives near Page Street, you know, I think, and Bruce is a resident of Page Street, it's important that cars do have access to Page Street. And it's very important to think about how Page Street can be designed to maintain safety for those who are walking or skating or biking, but also still accessible for people who live along Page. So, you know, real quickly, I'll make one comment, then hand it over to you, Bruce. I saw your hand up. You know, I remember years ago hearing the term locals take Waller, but now I'm, you know, turning into people take Page. So, so go ahead, Bruce, or Olga, I see your hand. Or Bruce, did you have your hand up? Or
yeah, I did.
Okay, and then Olga after Bruce.
So I just want to say that living on Page, and I walk down to Ashbury almost every day, walking my dog, and people on the north-south streets, the side streets, I guess I could call them in the other direction, they don't stop for the stop signs anymore because they know that Page Street is east and west is a slow street. So nobody stops for those stop signs, and that causes a complete, it's changed the dynamic east and west really well, but not north and south.
And that's alarming.
I'd actually say the opposite, that I still stop there, but one thing that concerns me is the clarity around if bikes are supposed to stop there anymore going down. And so there's been a couple times where I've stopped and then I thought the bike was going to stop, but they didn't stop. They just kept going. So I don't think it's super clear, the rules of the slow streets. You know, I think there's lack of understanding, especially if you're somebody that's, you know, not from the area, that you are visiting Haight Street because it's a tourist destination as well as a resident serving corridor. And you are just treating every intersection as you're coming down the hill as a normal intersection. You would anticipate that the cars would stop on Page Street, but they don't, or the bikes rather.
And Olga, I'll be with you in one moment. I'm responding to a comment in the chat, and yeah, and that, you know, the comment about cars that are using Page for multiple blocks. You know, how can that be enforced? What can be done? How can it be better designed? You know, so it's not this like personal road for people who are in the know, so to speak. So Olga, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Let me see. I'm on, right?
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, in all due respect to Page Street residents, you know, I appreciate you and honor you for your living there. But I have also lived on Clayton for 46 years. Clayton, right at the kind of in the middle of the block between Haight and Page. So only a half a block away from Page. And I do have a car, and parking is very difficult in the Haight, as you probably all know. You know, sometimes in my life, I have driven for 2 hours to find parking in the neighborhood or around the neighborhood, way far away from the neighborhood. And so when this whole thing of Page Street closed down, it meant it was going to make it harder and harder for people like myself to find parking. And especially if I ever have a guest come and stay with me, they had Page Street as a no J parking kind of thing, where they didn't have to worry about getting a ticket every 2 hours, and they could relax and just you know, spend time with me. So as I mentioned earlier in the feed, you know, back in, I think it was May or June, I was with my boyfriend. We were looking for parking. He got a ticket from a police officer who unfortunately happened to be sitting at the corner of Page and Clayton, and gave him a motor vehicle moving violation ticket, you know, and he was going to actually move in with me. But at the time, you know, now that all this kind of went down, it just kind of blew that apart. But the main thing is he got the motor vehicle violation, which I think was totally unfair. Later, I talked to 2 police officers on my street that said they would have never given him the violation. They would have given him a warning. You know, subsequently, I see cars going down Page Street all the time. I don't know, I doubt if they live there. And, you know, I just think this was unfair. And I think that in my case, that there should be some way that my boyfriend could get out of that moving violation. I've gone down to the court with him several times, and each time we've gone, they've deferred the court because, you know, COVID. So it's never been decided about whether his ticket should be, you know, blown away, so to say.
What go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's just that one thing too is Waller doesn't have to pay for the, I mean, not Waller, I'm sorry, Page doesn't have to pay for residential parking. A lot of us do. And if they are going to be exempt from, if they're going to go into a permanent status, I think they should pay residential parking and let some free up other streets like Clayton or other streets to not have to pay the residential and have that free space for our guests that can come and not have to worry about getting a ticket every 2 hours. You know, it's just, it's really crazy. I'm sorry to have to bring this up, but this is like real life here, you know?
No, and you know, it's interesting. The Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council has for a long time been against permit parking. You know, it's one of those things where it literally takes a handful of people to get permit parking on streets, and it becomes this unfair in many ways. I know, you know, there are a lot of folks who it's a complicated issue, right? It's one that we generally are against. The permitted parking. I don't know if there's a way to undo permit parking, but these are all questions that need to be brought up and discussed as we look at Page as a permanent slow street, right? You know, as you mentioned, clarify the rules and the legal side of how these slow streets can be used. The signage is not good. You know, better planning, how, you know, COVID is going to end. Hopefully we won't have another 40,000 Uber and Lyfts in the city. But if we do, traffic patterns are going to drastically change and go back to a lot more of what it had been. And how is this increase in traffic going to impact Muni on Haight Street? How is it going to impact the side streets, right? There's so, going back to the whole planning and needing a comprehensive plan from the city and not just block by block, is that, you know, Page Street, a permanent Page, is going to impact Haight, which is going to impact Waller, which is going to impact Oak, which is going to impact Ashbury and Clayton and Schrader and and Stanton, right? And all of these things need to be brought into mind of, you know, how it can be done in a manner that doesn't clog up Haight Street. You know, with Muni cutting back service, thank you, David, for the reminder. You know, Muni's cutting back service. Like, you know, there's going to be an increase of cars because Muni isn't going to have enough buses for people to take. You know, how can things be enforced? Like, I think it's interesting. I visited Mexico years ago, and they have these like really steep speed bumps instead of stop signs. Like, you know, I know that Page Street tried traffic circles for a little bit. Like, these are things that need to be looked at, and how these patterns, I'm sure there's got to be data pre-COVID, and taking a look comprehensively. You know, there's 4 schools between Stanton and Divisadero. When schools reopen, people are going to be driving through. As a parent, I can tell you parents are the worst when it comes to following traffic rules and being cognizant of other people. These are things that, you know, hundreds of parents a day are going to be on Page Street, you know, and so these are things that need to be mentioned. Jamie, go ahead. You had your hand up.
Hi, thanks, James. I just wanted to say that I very much support Page Street being a slow street, and hopefully it will become permanent. And I think I'm just in the camp right now of I think every street should be a slow street, particularly given what we now know about pedestrian, bike, cyclist, wheelchair deaths, particularly in D5. I think we now know it's the second most dangerous area for traffic deaths in the city. And so I understand that when Page became a slow street, it was poorly planned, and it was largely because we were in a crisis, which we're sort of still in. And I don't think it was very well thought through, but I really want to support us and neighbors working with whoever it's going to be, whether it's DPW, I don't know who's going to be in charge of planning Page Street, but working with them to make it work much better. And there's lots that can be done. And a lot of cities besides San Francisco are doing slow streets, including Oakland and Berkeley. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of good information floating around through the planning communities. So I just wanted to lend my support for the concept and for making it better and hopefully making it more extensive throughout the city.
No, I agree. And I think it's important that all of the voices are heard, right? That's a problem I think many of us are frustrated
Agreed.
With city government. And Bruce, sorry, I saw your hand go up and then it disappeared on my screen. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I just want to say I live on the 1900 block of Page Street. I've been here about 30 years. And it's one of the busiest blocks in the neighborhood. We have the delivery trucks from Whole Foods. We have the UCSF shuttles that use it as a shortcut. We have all the ride-sharing folks that use it as a shortcut. I live across the street from a very busy school. So there's lots of double parking. It's just, you know, constantly busy all the time. Even have tour buses that come down. And with the slow streets restriction, all that is gone away. They're forced to use the thoroughfares, which are Haight Street and Stanton Street, to get onto Oak, which is what everybody's trying to do, or not to have to cross over Haight Street. That's the UCSF shuttles. So now they're forced to do that. And it's made things a whole lot safer and quieter and less polluted on the block. Now, as far as the residential parking permit, the RPP program, you know, this comes up probably every 5 to 10 years on Page Street. And they target us. And the last time they tried to do it, we pushed back on it, as we always do. But they kept extending it. They started almost all the way out at Alamo Square and then they started doing this creep all the way up through across the Panhandle because they want to get Page Street. And it's, you know, I would say that there could be a movement to remove the residential parking permits, especially now. I think, you know, it should all be suspended. But, you know, I have to drive if there's no real good public transportation where I have to go work. And yeah, it's hard to park, but, you know, it's just the nature of things. I don't know how else to fix that except to restrict everybody else that comes to visit by doing residential parking permits. But I abhor it because the city doesn't really enforce it. So, you know, I think it's just a big revenue stream for the city. that's really about it.
Thank you. And I'll one more thought, and then Olga, I see your hand up. You know, and it might be one of those things where, you know, permanent isn't necessarily permanent. Maybe it needs to be reevaluated every couple of years, because again, I think that in many cases there's a movement, and then feelings or attitudes change, and not all voices are heard, and things need to be tweaked. So I think, you know, whether it's the supervisors, DPW, wherever this decision is being made, a lot of public outreach, and real public outreach, not the kind where they present something, ask questions, but have already made a decision, you know, is occurring. So, Olga, yes.
Well, I just want to say that, you know, I do need a car. And I've said earlier, it is very hard to find parking in the Haight. Taking away Page Street like that took away a lot of parking places, just putting it that way. And you know, in my view of Page Street, it always seemed like a slow street way. You know, I hope we don't have more of these slow streets. I have seen them in different parts of the city, Berkeley. I haven't gone to Oakland lately that much, but they're inconvenient. And I'm sorry, in a way, it's kind of privileged to have that on your street. Like my street, Clayton, between Haight and Page, is an extremely busy street. You know, a lot of construction going on, a lot of PG&E construction, all that stuff, and have to deal with that. You know, so I mean, I like to have guests sometimes too. And like I said, I don't want them to have to get a, you know, $90 ticket because they come to see me, you know, for the residential parking. I mean, I personally do have the J sticker, which is great, but not my friends don't have that. And I just think it's unfair. You know, it's inhumane as far as I'm concerned. You know, have to pay these big, huge parking tickets.
I think, you know, and that's something that definitely needs to be looked at. I think one of the areas where parking has been reduced are the car shares, right? Another thing that HANC was against years ago, and still is, as far as I know, are these car share spaces that are basically private little spaces. You know, again, it's a very complex issue when it comes to, you know, parking availability, private vehicles. There are many attitudes about it, you know, and I think that those are things that need to be discussed. As far as I know, no parking has been reduced on the slow streets. I know that parking spaces have been taken away in front of Phaeton, the school over near Stanyon and White Zones. We try to work with neighbors. I would say some schools have been a lot more collaborative than others in working with us. So there's definitely, you know, I hear your concerns on that, and I think that being you know, Preston Kilgore, who's in Dean Preston's office, his contact info was put in the comments by Jen Snyder. So thank you. He's the point person on Page Street Transit. So I think that sending concerns from local residents of, you know, privatization of parking spaces like the car share, or the permit parking, or a reduction of parking for neighbors who work in places where public transit is not available, and especially with Muni probably being reduced in many ways, are we going to see more people driving, which I don't think anybody necessarily wants to see, but Muni, I would say is not being given the focus that the city really needs to. You know, there's a push for free Muni, which is great. With a city with a $9 billion budget, there's no reason we should have a crappy public transit system that isn't free for most or all residents. So that is my
mention real quick, James,
rant.
that there is a actual campaign where you can sign up for action alerts, and I'll post it in the chat.
Great.
For it's Make Muni Free for the remainder of the pandemic campaign, and I'll post it there in the chat.
Great. Thank you. So I think these are all great ideas. You know, I urge everybody to email Preston Kilgore. That's Preston, Preston .Kilgore, Kilgore at sfgov.org on your views of whether it's JFK or Page. You know, we will continue to engage Supervisor Preston's office. You know, this was a lot of soft sounding of the ideas and getting a feel for what the membership, how the membership feels about Page and JFK and the Panhandle and so many things. You know, it's so hard to fit everything into a 2-hour meeting. We could focus on any one of these topics. I think many of us look forward to having in-person meetings again where we could have a more dynamic, facilitated discussion. I see a lot of great comments coming in on the side there. So I want to thank everybody. You know, it's 9 o'clock. I want to thank everybody for your time and attendance. I think these are things that we look forward to exploring. You know, normally we would say drive home safely, but as you get up and walk to another room, please make sure that your legs are awake and that you're doing all right. So any last comments from board members or any last questions before we end the meeting?
Are we going to do the leave it open again?
Oh, yes, I will log off, but happy to leave it open for folks.